Hello and welcome to Mental Health Hour. I'm Dr. Tapo. I always start by commenting on the weather because I think it's a once you've lived in Canada long enough, it becomes a habit because we have such extremes of weather. Yesterday, Sunday, we had a snowstorm, and today all the snow has melted. It's very sunny. It's a beautiful day, and this is like less than 24 hours later. So we tend to comment on the weather, I think, more than necessary. I hope everyone is doing well. We are approaching mid-month, in the month of March 2024. So the year is progressing along well, quickly. It's always a pleasure to be on Mental Health Hour. It's something that I absolutely enjoy, spending this time connecting with you wherever you are around the globe, talking about our mental health, the factors that impact our mental health, the things that we need to do to improve our mental health, how we can take care of each other as well as ourselves. Before I go any further, just a reminder that the Mental Health Hour is for educational and information purposes only. So if you do need help, please get help from a qualified professional close to you. It can be a physician, it can be a therapist, a psychiatrist. It can even be your properly trained preacher. I think sometimes we seek clinical or medical help from people who can only offer spiritual help. It's important to know what we need and who to access it from. And some churches, some religious institutions, some mosques do have trained clinicians, therapists who are volunteering or working on staff. Some people go to Bible college and learn how to be spiritual and clinical counselors. And these are the people that support us spiritually and mentally as we seek better mental health. So do seek help from the right people. Sometimes we take that step to seek help, but it's from absolutely inappropriate, incapable, lacking capacity, lacking compassion as well. And we are disappointed, and it can deter us or discourage us from seeking help next time. But the responsibility is ours to seek help from the right person. Seek help from the right person, people that are equipped to help you, that are sensitive to your issue or situation, and can give you the help that you need. As always, I encourage you to write in, email us, text us. Tell us what's going on for you. Tell us what's worked for you. If you've been through some mental health challenges and you've come out on the other end and want to share what worked, how you took care of yourself and access the help that you need, maybe some of the lessons you learned along your journey, please get in touch. Let us know. We always want to hear from you. And the number is 437-778-3299, 437-778-3299, or email infolovebay@gmail.com, infolovebay@gmail.com. So we've been kind of exploring. We started off by exploring the factors that impact our mental health: social factors, economic factors, physical factors, emotional factors. So there were quite a number. And over the last few weeks, we've been talking about codependency. We kind of eased our way into talking about relationships. And we've been focusing on codependency, what it is, what it looks like, what can cause it, how we can evaluate our relationships, examine ourselves, and see, am I a codependent person? Do I need to do some work around this so that I can have healthier relationships, more stable relationships? Because codependency tends to come with chaos. There's no stability, very chaotic. Okay, so we will continue talking a little bit about codependency, but today I want to ease us into self-esteem, which we have talked about before in the past, but we're going to go back into looking at self-esteem as it relates to our mental health, obviously, but codependency. But before we go into that, let's see who has written in and what they've written in to say. What can we learn from our listeners around the world? So to start with, today we'll start locally. Now, a few people wrote in to congratulate me. On International Women's Day, I received an award in Niagara region, which is where I live and work and do whatever I can for whoever I can. And I received an award on Friday last week. I got to tell you, it was one of the best days of my life, mostly because it was just really affirming, really validating. I am the founder of an organization called Future Black Female, and I founded it in 2019. We work with Black girls and youth. Lately, we've been working with young Black boys and men as well, because there's been such an outcry we've received messages, emails from parents of boys and young men saying, my son needs help too. And if you know Niagara region, one of the things about this area is everyone keeps talking about Niagara region is predominantly white. So people of color like us tend to be overlooked, ignored, sidelined, marginalized, and all of that. And the work that my organization has been doing is trying to highlight our needs as Black communities in the region. We also provide mental health support to Black girls and young women 16 to 22 from across Canada. And through our program, over 215 have accessed one-to-one psychotherapy. So I got this award on Friday, and a few of you have written in to congratulate me. And I am really grateful to those two listeners and to everybody else out there who supports the work that we're doing in cash, in kind, in prayers, whatever way. We really do appreciate it. It's not easy work, but it's absolutely fulfilling, especially when we can break down barriers and create opportunities for our Black youth. So thank you to the listeners that wrote in to congratulate me. And we'll come to Scarborough. So I have a fan. I have a fan in Scarborough who says, Dr. Tapo, your honest approach in your program is very refreshing. Thank you so much to my fan in Scarborough. Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I hesitate because I don't want to discourage people from writing in and sharing their problems and sharing their experiences and that. But one thing I will let you know is the way I do mental health hour is the way I do therapy. And often my clients, even after a couple of years, 3 years, when they hit a snag, when they're struggling again, they come back, because therapy is not supposed to make you feel better. I know that sounds weird, but the point of therapy is for you to grow, so that those issues and those problems that are plaguing you right now will not be issues and problems once you've done the work. And that's why I keep saying during the mental health hour, do the work. And work is laborious, work is straining, work is confronting some of those things that we prefer to deny, we prefer to sweep under the rug, pretend it's not an issue. So I do tend to be direct because I am honestly and genuinely invested in other people's mental health as much as I'm invested in my own. And I've had therapists, I'll tell you, I had a just weird experience recently. I was going through a difficult time. I decided to reach out for therapy. And I specifically asked for a Black therapist because I just don't want what has happened sometimes in the past when I have a therapist who is white. I've had a therapist who is Asian. I've had a therapist who's white male. You can tell that I've been to therapy lots of times because I just don't see the point of struggling on my own when I can get help. So with relationship issues, with grief and loss, sometimes just trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, I go and I speak to a therapist when I can afford it or if I have benefits and can access it. So recently, I decided I needed therapy to help me work through some things. So I asked for a Black therapist. I was referred to a Black gentleman who is a therapist. At one point during therapy, he called me babe. He commented on my looks several times. And no, I never went back. After that session, I thanked him for his help and support and said I would look for somebody else. My point here is you're not looking for somebody who, and maybe he thought he was doing me a favor by commenting on my looks, telling me how pretty I looked and all of that. But that doesn't help my mental health. It made me feel very uncomfortable, and it was absolutely inappropriate, especially like like when he called me babe, which he apologized for. But right there, you don't want a therapist who does that type of nonsense. That is exactly what that was, nonsense. And I shudder to think that this man is out there offering therapy, doing stuff like that. You want a therapist who will be honest with you, will help you confront what you need to confront. Some of us spend our entire lives avoiding confrontation. Listen, confrontation is never, ever a bad thing if it is done right. People associate confrontation with aggression, and that's not what it is. Confrontation is simply facing something that you would rather avoid. You're facing something head on, you're looking it in the eye, and you're challenging it because it's been challenging you and you want a change in your life. Confrontation is not aggression. So you want a therapist who will help you confront the things you need to confront. You want a therapist who will be honest with you. You want a therapist, and it's not judgment. When a therapist tells you as it is, it's not judgment. It is what you need to hear to move forward. Some of us are looking for therapists that will pander us, compliment us, make us feel pretty or feel good or whatever it is. But as soon as that therapy is done, we realize nothing changed. In fact, you end up in a codependent relationship with your therapist, or maybe your therapist is the one who's codependent if they're calling you babe and commenting on your looks, right? So therapy is where you go to grow. You want to learn your coping skills. You want to figure things out, correctly identify and label problems so you can correctly find solutions in a healthy, productive, and constructive way. So thank you to the fan in Scarborough. I know that I'm just like, honestly, I want us to do better for ourselves and for each other. And that's not going to happen if we're not being truthful, authentic, and honest about our struggles. And some of us are struggling in ways that are self-destructive. And as a therapist, I will tell you that if you're my client, and I will tell you that if you're a listener on Mental Health Hour, because we don't want you to self-destruct. We want you to grow. We want you to thrive. We want you to be the best, absolutely best version of yourself they could ever be. And that takes confronting things that we need to confront. That takes truth. And that also takes brevity. You also have to be brave. You also have to be strong in ways that maybe some of us have never been challenged to be. And now all of a sudden you're in this place, in this situation, and you need to be brave enough to face what you need to face so you can come out on the other side. So thanks to the listener in Scarborough. I appreciate that. Please keep writing in. Share what you're doing. If you don't want your name, like you've noticed, I hardly say names because I do want to maintain people's confidentiality. So often I'll just say where you're from and not your actual name, unless if it's such a generic name that there could be 10 million people with the same name, then I'm a little more comfortable saying names. Okay, let's move a little further from Scarborough, which is here in Ontario, in the GTA. Now we're in New York. And this listener in New York says, I would like to tell all women and girls to embrace their self-worth. As we celebrate International Women's Day, which was last week, Friday, but here in Canada, and I think in other parts of the world, this is actually Women's History Month. So the whole month of March, we're celebrating women's contributions to the development of society, our nations, technology, arts, crafts, whatever. We're celebrating women this month of March. So to all women out there, and I think Sunday, was yesterday Sunday or Monday? Okay, on Sunday, we had Mother's Day in some parts of the world. So happy Mother's Day to mothers out there, and not just biological mothers, but mothers who mother other people's children out of compassion, out of truth and love. Happy Mother's Day to you all. Okay, so yes, let's celebrate International Women's Day and women. Practice self-love. That's what our listener in New York is advising us to do, to practice self-love and self-empowerment. And we'll definitely be easing ourselves into that self-esteem, which comes through self-love, self-empowerment, and all of that. We'll be talking about that some more today. Okay, London, England. Okay, so this listener from London says, how do you quantify inner peace and self-dependency? I believe there's a lot to unpack here. So this listener believes there's a lot to unpack when we think about how do we quantify inner peace and self-dependency. I don't know if we quantify it. You know, in research, we talk about qualitative versus quantitative. And I think these are more qualitative aspects of our being rather than quantitative, rather than quantifying it, rather than trying to summarize it in a way, because what I like, for example, as a researcher in qualitative research, is the fact that it's really based on people's accounts, people's experiences, people's limits and growth and all of that. So when we talk about how we measure or how we quantify inner peace or self-love, self-esteem, all of these things, it's really not something about giving a size or judgment or amount or measure to it. I think what it is aiming for that continuous quality experience of peace and that continuous quality experience of self-dependency and self-empowerment and self-worth and self-validation and self-esteem and self-love and self. It's really about increasing, consistently growing, consistently tapping into, rather than quantifying, rather than trying to measure it, or a size, putting a size or metric to it. Because as much as we talk about self-esteem, something I've learned through my work, but also through my personal experiences, is self-esteem is something that comes and goes depending on our situations, our contexts. And if you have a healthy self-esteem, it doesn't mean it stays the same the entire time. What it means is, even when you have something challenging it or impacting it, you can recover. I think that that's what we want to aim for, a type of self-esteem and self-love and self-worth and self-empowerment that can recover from hard impacts. I think the difference between the people we say have a healthy self-esteem and the people we say have no or low self-esteem is how it recovers when those challenges come. I'll give an example. You're in a relationship, it seems to be going well, and then the person comes to you and says, yeah, I'm not feeling this. This isn't working for me. I think we should end this. And you had already started in your mind thinking about the future, which is not a bad thing. Like, the point of dating is there a future or not? And you were seeing it one way, and maybe this person, and if you are a healthy person with a healthy self-esteem, that's a bit of an impact. It will impact you. It will hurt. It will make you question things. But if you had a healthy self-esteem, you will recover relatively quickly. And you won't suffer that second guessing yourself and all of that for a long period of time. It might happen for a brief period while you're just coming to terms with the ending of a relationship that you had good hopes for, but you will recover. People with low or no self-esteem tend to have a difficult time recovering from the hard knocks in life. I remember some years ago, I was living and working in Ireland at the time. I think I was studying for my master's degree. I had a job that I liked, and this job was a pilot program. I wrote the policies and procedures for this program. I did all the work. I gave it a name, my mission, vision, all of that. I did all that. And it was a project that was designated under a specific piece of legislation. And so once I had done all this and we were ready for accreditation and we got accredited, like, yes, you've met all the criteria and the standards we want for this project, you can now go ahead and start working with clients, I was fired. I did not see it coming because I had done all this work, but I was fired. And it was a hard knock, because when you invest of yourself and you take ownership of something, and afterwards you can start thinking like, I'll never do that again. I'm not going to invest myself in blah, 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 and all of that. And I had moments when I felt and thought that way, but I recovered. And once I got over the initial shock and stopped second guessing myself, I realized that it wasn't me. So it's not that I had to change myself. And sometimes when people are disappointed in relationships, in situations like that, they become embittered and resentful, and it changes their character and personality. And to me, that's an indicator of issues with your self-esteem, because you have to be able to take a step back and look at what happened. And for me, what happened there, and the person who fired me had, in a way, been giving me warning for a while. Like one time she called me into her office and accused me of, and this was my boss, my manager, she accused me of trying to steal her job. She accused me of trying to show her up. She said just because I knew how to do certain things that she didn't know, and all of that. And so as soon as we got accredited and she felt like, okay, I can take it from here, she got me fired. So it wasn't me. But for a moment, it hurt my self-esteem, but I recovered because I was able to separate who I am fundamentally as a person, as a professional, all of that, and what had happened to me. And I was good. I was okay. I was good. But if I had low self-esteem at that point in my life, it would have really gone, like, because it was tough. It was a tough period. And we go through this period, and having a healthy self-esteem helps us weather these periods of loss, of grief, of disappointment, of discouragement. Being discouraged doesn't mean you have low self-esteem. It simply means you're discouraged. And normally those with a healthy self-esteem are able to encourage themselves, find encouragement in the right spaces and places, and forge forward. And that's really what we want. So having a healthy self-esteem, having a healthy, this writer said, self-dependency, it's not quantifiable. Your inner peace is not quantifiable because it doesn't stay the same. It does not stay the same, just like love doesn't stay the same. So how do you quantify something that is so dynamic? You cannot, but you can tap into it and you can evaluate, where am I? And in this situation, how are things going? And I said so last time that in our relationships, we need to take inventory, evaluate things consistently, regularly, so that we see where we are. Sometimes we're so, especially for those of us who are codependent, we're so desperate to hold on to relationships and things that are doing us harm. We cannot take that step back to self-evaluate. Where am I? How is this working for me? Am I in a meaningful situation, meaningful not only for yourself, but for the other person as well? Because that's what a healthy relationship is. So let's go back briefly to the topic of codependency, because that's all the messages I got this week. And again, don't be scared to write in, because Dr. Tapo is too honest. I will be honest with you. Am I too honest? Personally, I don't think so. I think I'm just honest enough to motivate change where change needs to happen. I was talking to some of the guys I work with, and I said to them when I was receiving the award, standing up there on a podium, and there were like 500, like literally 500 plus faces looking up at me. I can honestly tell you there were a number of faces that looked frightened. And so I said to my colleagues, like, and there was one person in particular, I was like, I don't understand. Every time I encounter this person, they look scared, they look frightened, and one of them said, I think it's because you are a very direct person. You say things as they are. And people are afraid of truth, especially when you're talking about certain topics like racism, like discrimination, like misogyny and gender-based violence and mental health. We talk a lot about the stigma of mental health, and part of that is we hide things. We don't want to admit when we need help with our mental health. We don't want to talk about the things that are causing us distress. We don't want to appear weak. We don't want to appear whatever way. So we don't talk about the things that we absolutely need to. So please write in, send your messages. I will be as gentle as I need to be and as honest as you deserve me to be, so that we can move forward, so that you can heal, so that you can establish those boundaries, those practices that ensure your positive, your health, your mental health. Okay, so text 437-778-3299 or email infolovebay@gmail.com. Okay, so on the topic of codependency, we've talked about some of the signs and symptoms. And just briefly, what is codependency? It is a relationship pattern, a behavioral pattern, rather, in relationships where you are consistently, always persistently prioritizing others over yourself and depending on them in an unhealthy way, or trying to make them dependent on you because you fear that they will abandon you, they won't like you, they won't love you. So you invest in this relationship to your detriment. And relationships are not supposed to cause our detriment. They're supposed to prop us up, strengthen us, feed us, nourish us, and nurture us so that we can be better versions of ourselves. But codependency works the other way around. So you tend to disconnect and disengage from your own needs just so you can fulfill the needs of other people. You tend to behave erratically. There's a lot of chaos and instability. The relationship dynamics are just, in a word, dangerous, right? And it affects your self-esteem, your self-worth, your general well-being. So we talked about some of those traits. Now, if I say some of these things, you might think like, so for example, self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is not a bad thing. I think if you're a parent, you have definitely self-sacrificed several or many times. If you are a spouse or a partner in a long-term relationship, you've probably self-sacrificed. So self-sacrifice in itself is not a bad thing. It becomes dangerous or toxic or pathological when you self-sacrifice to the point of self-harm. I've used the example of the house will burn down around you and you will stay in that burning building instead of running to save yourself because you're afraid, if I run and save myself, this person will abandon me, this person will not like me anymore. So you self-sacrifice in harmful, self-harming ways, harmful ways. Okay, so it's not that, just like I've said, being dependent in a relationship is not a bad thing, but there's a level of dependency that is toxic, harmful, pathological, and that's when we veered into codependency territory. Okay. A tendency to focus on others, again, not a bad thing. We often admire people. I mean, I got an award last Friday because of my tendency to focus on others. So it's not a bad thing. But when it reaches those toxic, self-harming, self-destructive, chaotic levels, then it's a bad thing. So what I'm getting at here is the need for balance. Self-sacrifice, but in a balanced way, which means when you need to say no, you do say no. When you need to separate yourself from a situationship, an entanglement, a toxic person, toxic relationship, you do so, right? So it's not that self-sacrifice or focusing on others is bad, but it is when it is at those toxic levels. There's a need for control, and often that control is quite manipulative. So it's not even control that is straight up, outright control. It's often manipulated. It is often camouflaged and disguised in various ways to manipulate and control people and situations out of fear of abandonment, fear of all sorts of things. So you become manipulative and controlling in really dangerous and toxic ways. And you have difficulty labeling your emotions as well as expressing those emotions. So these are the traits of codependent type people. And there is a codependent personality disorder, which is a diagnosable pathological disorder. You go to the right clinician, whether it's a physician, a psychiatrist, or depending on where you live, you can actually be diagnosed with codependent personality disorder. And that means you've been going from one relationship to the next, to the next, to the next, repeating these patterns. Okay. So we looked at some of the signs of codependency. So that deep-seated need for approval, little to no self-worth. So you will sacrifice yourself in ways that clearly indicate you have no self-worth. You don't value yourself. You don't value your time. You don't value your safety. You don't value, so you abuse yourself. You abuse yourself, and normally would end up in relationships where others abuse you too. In different contexts, it looks different. In the workplace, it might be that co-worker who volunteers for everything, who stays home till stays at work, doesn't go home till late at night, constantly brown nosing, seeking approval, trying to please everyone, to the point that they're overworked, they've become unproductive, and sometimes it manifests in toxic relationship patterns, interpersonal relationship patterns, like gossip. You go to this person, you're gossiping about that person because you think, if I gossip with this person, then they'll like me and they'll attach to me and will become BFFs. And then with that person, you act a certain way. So there's no, your colleagues would all have something different to say about who you are, because you don't maintain any sort of firm identity, firm values, firm characteristics or personality traits. You're constantly changing. You're like a chameleon. You're changing all the time to please people, to fit in. Nobody knows the real you, including yourself. So you tend to minimize or ignore your own desires, your own needs in relationships. There's a lot of anxiety in codependent relationships. You are doing things you don't want to do to make others happy. And a lot of times those others are not investing in you the way you're investing in them. And you don't see this, and you keep investing and investing and investing to the point that it destroys you. You idealize and take on other people's values because you don't know your own. Or even where you do, you reject your own in favor of theirs because you think that's what will make your relationship work. And you end up finding that just as you don't value yourself, other people don't value you either. So these are some of those common signs of codependency. And again, remember that dependency itself is not bad. In a healthy dependent relationship, it could be with your spouse, your parents, your siblings, your best friend, your boss, whatever it is, yes, you depend on them, but you depend on them in such a way that you are confident enough to state your needs and desires and not worry like, will they reject me? They won't like me. So you don't repress and stifle and silence yourself. You're able to ask for help, ask for what you need. You're able to be your authentic self, flaws and all. Like, nobody's perfect. We all say this. But when you're codependent, you become hyper focused on what is wrong with you, that you can't not be yourself when you're around other people. And eventually you cannot be yourself even to yourself, right? So these are those signs of codependencies that I said we need to look at ourselves. If a lot of this sounds like you, then I implore you, really, really implore you, go and get help. If you want your next relationship to be healthy, to be strong, to be fulfilling and meaningful, get the help you need to work on your codependency. If maybe you're kind of 50-50, I would still advise you to get help. If you found like one or two, set some goals and work on them, okay? Set some personal goals for growth and work on them. But don't ignore this. Don't shrug and say, oh, okay, and ignore them, because to me, that too is a sign of something's wrong. When you realize that I need help here, I'm not doing okay here. I was in a conversation earlier today and somebody asked, like, how do you know when you need help? And I said to them, usually when you start asking yourself, do I need help? You need help. So go and get it. Okay. Don't wait until things are irreversible, until things are crisis level, and then start looking for help. When you start to see that I might have some issues here or something might be going on, go and get help right away. Again, from the right and appropriate people who are equipped and have the capacity to help you. Don't go get help from your Auntie Mabel, who is on her 8th husband, on relationships, if you understand what I'm saying. Or Uncle Harry over there, who has 18 children with 13 different people and is not looking after them, and all sorts of, those are not the appropriate people to help. And you might feel comfortable asking them for help because the truth is they will just validate your really messed up ideas. Please look for people that are equipped and have the capacity to help you. And look for people you can trust with your personal information. And I'm saying this because gossip is real. And confidentiality is one of those really precious things that we need when we seek help. So don't go tell your friend that you know is a blabbermouth, or your brother or sister that you know will tell all your cousins and grandma and grandpa and their neighbors. The right people, the appropriate people who have the capacity and are equipped to help you will help you. And you will not regret it. You will not regret it. Okay. So self-esteem, when we start talking about self-esteem, self-worth, and all, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? So self-esteem is one of those words that pop psychology has co-opted, and we hear it all the time. We throw it around all the time, but a lot of us don't actually know what is it. What is self-esteem? How do I get me some? And where is my self-esteem? I'm a living, breathing human being. Why do I not have self-esteem? And in previous sessions, we talked at length about self-esteem, but I will reiterate. So self-esteem is something, we're not born with self-esteem, right? It's something that as we are socialized nurtured by our immediate and primary family, so the family you were born in or whoever is looking after you, similar to dependency, I talked about when a baby is born, they're 100% dependent, even before they're born, right? They're encased in a safe environment in their mother's womb, so they are born dependent. They come into this world dependent. They don't come into this world with self-esteem. But as they develop that independence, and I gave the example when a baby cries when they're tiny, immediately somebody responds with the bottle or the breast or change their nappy or shift them or whatever. Baby thinks they're magic because any little thing, somehow there's the right response, which is what mothering is really at the beginning of life. But as they grow, they start to see that they are actually a separate person from this hand or this body that responds every time I'm in need. This is called individuation, where they become an individual. They start to see that I am different. And you can usually test this when your baby, you give them a mirror and they look at themselves in the mirror and they look at you, then they look back at the mirror and they might touch their own face or try and touch the mirror or try and touch you. That's them figuring out that, oh, this person is separate from me, and this that I'm looking at in the mirror is me. So they become fascinated because they're discovering themselves. And as they're discovering themselves, the self-esteem starts to grow. And throughout early childhood, even through to adolescence, early adulthood, our self-esteem should be continuously growing through nurturing, through different experiences. That first time when you stand on stage and talk to a crowd of people and you don't absolutely freeze, your self-esteem it's growing with every milestone, every accomplishment, and every compliment. As your parents start to allow you that autonomy, you will find that children with controlling parents usually struggle with self-esteem because they were never given space to figure out, can I do this on my own? Failure is a good thing in life. We don't think it is, but it actually is, because it teaches us that not everything will go exactly the way we want to. But even after that failure, there's life, there's opportunities, there's other chances, right? But if a person is not allowed to experience this by controlling parents or restrictive and oppressive, because that's what oppression is. We talk a lot about oppression in this day and age, and we're not necessarily talking about enslaved people. We're talking about who is controlling what. Because the more you are controlled by systems, by research shows, for example, that people who experience a lot of microaggressions, racism, discrimination, tend to have low self-esteem. Why? Because of that aspect of control. So when we talk about oppression, we're talking about the impact of systems and control and policing and all of this on an individual to the extent that they cannot practice their autonomy, their self-actualization, be their authentic self. So you can see why codependency and low or no self-esteem go hand in hand, because there is no autonomy. So as the baby is growing, the caregiver, whether it's the mother, the father, grandmother, whoever it is who is raising and nurturing that child as the primary caregiver, allows them autonomy. So the baby, when they first start being able to sit up and crawl, they don't go very far. But as they gain confidence, they venture further and further away. And that's good for their self-esteem, because they learn, oh, I can go far and still come back. I can go to this space and I have the power to come back. I can do this. And we need children to grow up with enough space to explore, to, when they first start walking, they'll walk a couple of steps, they'll fall on their bum. You don't then say, like, no more trying to walk. From now on, you're just sitting down. No, you keep encouraging them, keep trying. And they fall a million times, but that day will come when they walk and they don't fall. And that's good for their self-esteem. But where there's too much control, too much restriction, too much oppression, self-esteem does not develop, because that individual is not allowed enough time and space. It's like when you watch, I used to watch, I think it's Criminal Minds, which is a TV show, Criminal Minds, and they would profile criminals, serial killers, and all of that. And so many of their episodes were focused on these serial killers that grow up bitter and resentful and hateful and go ahead to kill people who remind them of the person that was controlling throughout their childhood. And these same serial killers, one of the things that the profilers will always say, the FBI, or I think the FBI profilers would say, low self-esteem. Because control stifles self-esteem. Oppression stifles self-esteem. And we know that in codependent relationships, and I've talked about this before, you will often find that codependent person ends up with somebody who is controlling, narcissistic, abusive, because they don't have a healthy self-esteem. So if you're listening to me and you are a parent, a caregiver, a teacher, whatever capacity you have to help a person's self-esteem develop, think about how much control you have over that person. Now, I'm not saying just let them run buck wild like monkeys in a forest. Wherever they want to go, they go, that's not what I'm saying. Discipline is still very important. In fact, people that lack discipline can also end up with low self-esteem, because nobody ever confronted them, nobody ever corrected them, nobody ever helped them learn how to problem solve and decision make. It was just go and do what you want. And often what would happen is they would make mistake and face those consequences alone. And that's not good for self-esteem as you're growing. So as a parent, a caregiver, you want your child, that young person, to be able to explore. If they fail, they face consequences, but they're not alone. And you're encouraging them and you're affirming them. Even when they make the wrong decision, you're there to reassure them, to advise them, to offer them support, and to help them get up and keep trying. You're there to help them identify their strengths, their flaws, and how they can work on their flaws, because nobody is perfect. So we need balance. And the more we talk about mental health, the more we realize that a lot of it is about balance. The times when we're in crisis, it's because that balance has been upset or been lost. And so we end up in crisis situations because of a lack of balance. So self-esteem develops in a good and healthy way where there's balance. There's discipline, not control. there's a difference between discipline and control. And any good parent knows that. They know how to say no to the child, how to dish out compliments and consequences. They know how to give permission, set boundaries, offer healthy, protective limitations. And not only do they know how to do this, they also demonstrate it. They are models of those same things. You cannot try and teach your child balance when you yourself have none. And I will say this, low self-esteem begets low self-esteem. You will not have a parent who has low self-esteem who will nurture a child that has a healthy one. How? This is why I said you might even find a child and parent codependent relationships. And I think I've spoken about one woman I worked with was codependent with her spouse and codependent with her children. And when the spouse left her, she turned all of it on her children, using guilt on them, using shame on them, manipulating them, forcing them to choose between her and their dad in a way that was really, really destroying to the kids, to the extent that one of the kids ended up needing therapy themselves. And so some of us have been raised by codependent parents. And that has produced that codependency in us as well. It is a normal human thing to look for what we're familiar with. So some of you have written in and said, why do all my relationships follow the same pattern? It's because it's familiar. And maybe if you trace it far enough, it started in the way that you were nurtured and raised in your home. So as nurturers, as caregivers, as parents, we need to be aware, are we controlling or are we disciplining? Are we offering both compliments and consequences? Are we encouraging that autonomy and self-actualization that will produce a healthy self-esteem in our children? We need to think about this, and we need to be intentional. It doesn't happen automatically. We need to be intentional. And sometimes when we make those mistakes that result in those hard impacts, we need to be there to help our young people recover from that through their self-esteem. And sometimes that comes by a parent confessing that, you know what I did was wrong and I shouldn't have, and I apologize. I made a mistake. But where some parents will never, ever, ever apologize to their child, like I'm the parent that the child they did. That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong, because you will make mistakes and you are accountable to your children. And that accountability is important for their growth and development. You raise a child that never once heard you say, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. And often when children are in those relationships, what it comes down to is the parent is obstinate and refuses to admit they're wrong and apologize. And so the child has to apologize. And then you raise a child who cannot stand up for themselves because you snuffed it out of them with your inability and inflexibility. Learn to apologize. Even if you're an employer, whoever you are, you're in a position of authority where people need you to be accountable, need you to be honest when things go wrong, because their self-esteem depends on it. I'll say this because it was something I learned on Friday. I listened to this panel on mental health in the workplace. And this person was speaking and they said, research shows that 70% of people say their boss, their employer, has more impact on their mental health than their families, their spouses, their children, and so forth. So whatever position of authority you hold, you are accountable to those people that report to you, that are subordinate to you, that are dependent on you. And the way you treat them has an impact on their mental health. We've come to the end of our mental health hour. I wish you a wonderful rest of the evening. If you're here in Canada or the West, North America, other parts of the world, I know it's pretty late. I wish you a wonderful rest of the week and the rest of the month. We will return not next week, but the week after, and continue talking about self-worth, self-esteem, self-love, and self-care as well is in that bundle. Take care of yourselves with compassion, with love. Let's take care of each other as well. Good night.